Greetings and welcome to the Upper Pen podcast. My name is Dakota and today I'm talking with Jessie Mihalik about her recently released book, Hunt the Stars, which is the first book in the Starlight's Shadow series. Jessie is the author of the Consortium Rebellion trilogy and the Rogue Queen series. Each series is a sci-fi and features strong women who take no crap from people trying to stop them from doing what needs to be done. Oftentimes this includes their love interest. Hunt the Stars follows a bounty hunter and former soldier named Octavia Zarola, who is commissioned to transport her sworn enemy, Torrin Fletcher, a Valoff general that she fought in the war, into enemy territory. Jessie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I am delighted to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you because I really enjoyed the Consortium Rebellion. So yeah. I'm really excited for this series too.
Oh, I love that. I'm so glad. I love writing, fierce female characters who really, as you said, well, don't take any crap from anybody. So I'm glad you're enjoying them.
They're actually some of my favorite parts of this well, not this book specifically, but all of your books. It's just really refreshing to see sci-fi with women that aren't stereotypes.
Yes, yeah, I tried to stay away from as many stereotypes as possible. So hopefully I succeeded. I'm sure some snuck in there because it's just sort of embalmed in culture and you sort of internalize that. But I tried to get away from as many as possible.
You have a really good knack for making each character's individual too. So your series typically follow 3 different women in each book, correct?
Yes, yep.
So how do you keep track of who they are and what kind of characteristics they have? Is it just mental?
It's partially mental. It's partially, I write in a program called Scrivener, which has a section for like characters and notes and whatever. And so part of it is just keeping really good notes about like characteristics and likes and dislikes and things that I don't necessarily know when I'm starting out writing. But as I write something in one of the books that could become relevant in future books, I try to make sure I note that down in the character sheet so that I'm not, doing a word search in 110,000 words trying to figure out what I said that she liked on page 93. So
that makes a lot of sense, and it keeps it really consistent throughout each book and through the series as a whole. Yeah, so I love Scrivener. It's really great for going back and seeing what you've already done.
Yes. No, Scrivener is the thing that keeps me on track and on target. And what I will actually do is, especially when I'm writing the series books, I will take all of my research notes and all of my characters and whatever description and just copy them into the new books file. So I have all of that information starting out, and then I'll add to it, and then I'll take all of that stuff and copy it into book 3's file. So it sort of grows as it goes along.
So what kind of research do you do for the books?
I spend a lot of time on Wikipedia learning about things like, is faster than light travel theoretically possible? And if so, which ways could it potentially work? And I spend like literal hours doing research that ends up being 2 sentences in the book. But it does help me sort of, get that world building feel. And so even though I am not, dumping my incredible knowledge of random faster than light travel things, it helps like ground me in the universe.
You do really good because it feels real, right? The universe you build is organic in that way that I think is just comes from a lot of research and being really interested.
Yeah. So. I really appreciate that you feel that way, because sometimes it does feel like I'm just doing like, it sort of feels like research, like procrastination and research, but it does help me when I am doing the world building.
So how did you get started on Hunt the Stars?
Hunt the Stars originally started as I was watching The Mandalorian, and I was like, oh, Mando and Baby Yoda, who I know has a name and I don't care, it will forever be Baby Yoda. like they're so good together, but they're so lonely. Like they need a whole crew. And then also, what if this was a woman captain and then also a love interest? And it sort of just all grew from there. But it really was like oh, I want you to be happy. I could write something that's happy. So
Speaking of your little Baby Yoda and the Mandalorian, one of my favorite characters in this is Luna. And while she doesn't have a voice, she's so, I don't know, she's so characterized. It's really great.
I loved Luna. Like when I pitched this, I sold it on proposal to my editor, which means I had not written the book yet. I basically wrote like part of a first chapter and sort of maybe where I thought it was going to go, because my editor knows that I'm not a plotter. So we sort of like find out together where it's going to go after I write it. And she's like, I had told her, I was considering this sort of like a gender flipped Mandalorian, even though it sort of deviated from that as I was writing it. And she's like, oh, are you going to have something like Baby Yoda, like something like cute and adorable? And I was like, yes, I am now. Of course I am. And then Luna just sort of popped into my head and I was like, yes, this is going to work. I'm going to have this adorable little alien creature who is empathetic and slightly telepathic, and she is going to rule the ship even though she's teeny tiny.
Yes, and I can feel all of my dogs in her when she's just projecting food images into your brain.
Yeah. I figured some pet owners might realize that, if only their dogs or cats could, be telepathic, they would get very similar images from their pets.
Is she going to be in the later books?
She is, but not as much because she really is Tavis, and so she will definitely make some key appearances because the crew will be together, but there's some like separate together. So she will make guest appearances in the later books for sure.
One of my other really, really, really favorite characters is the ship itself. You do so good of describing it, and I always love the ship parts.
I love that.
Are you really into spaceships?
I'm really into sort of waving my hands and letting people envision what they want for spaceships. So I try and give just enough detail that you can envision spaceship, but not so much that it's like, and it was purple and it had stripes and it was whatever, but just like whatever in your mind is spaceship, like that's what I want you to envision. And then I give you like little pieces of like the garden, like because I was like, a hydroponic garden in space sounds amazing. Like who would not want some fresh vegetables while they are, coasting around in darkness? So I try to add character pieces like that, but I wouldn't say I'm huge into spaceships, but since it is a space opera that takes place across the galaxy, I have to be somewhat knowledgeable about spaceships.
It seems like, so the reason I ask is because your Polaris Rising and Aroura Blazing, they're all the ship names. So I was always curious.
Yeah, that happened because I started with Polaris and Polaris Rising was the working title. And then I was like, this has so many meanings. How can I work the rest of the ship names into this and also like meaning within the series? And so I did that, and then for Hunt the Stars, it's not the ship name, but the Starlight Shadow series title is the ship name. So I do always try to like sneak in some ship names into my series titles or book titles.
Well, it works really well because then, I get the sense of strength.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about your Valoff characters?
Yes. They are an alien race that humanity ran into somewhere in the far distant future once we figured out how to use wormholes to achieve that faster than light travel that I was talking about. And they're very human-like. And so in world, scientists are still debating about whether they started the human line or the humans jetted off and started the Valoff line. So they're very closely related, but the Volofs have mental abilities. They are telepathic, almost all of them. Some of them have additional abilities such as telekinesis or healing, or some additional abilities you will see in book 2 and book 3. But yeah, they're very human-like, except they grew up on an alien planet and had no idea that humans existed until they sort of clashed, and humans wanted what they had. They didn't really want that, and then there was a very long war. And Hunt the Stars happens just after the war is closed. I think it was like 3 years ago. And so there's still a lot of tension between the two.
So are you going to explore or give more detail about what happened before Hunt the Stars in the other series or in the other books?
Probably not a huge amount more detail. You'll get little peeks back into like during the war potentially, because that becomes relevant to some of the overall plot, but probably not a huge amount of detail. It's really kind of moving from this point forwards.
That makes sense. I do always have a yearning for what what happened in the past, but I understand it can't be done in all books.
Yeah.
I'm impressed that the series that you write are unashamedly romantic sci-fi, and I think that this is like a subgenre that's just not really done well or often.
Well, I don't know that I would say that necessarily. I think there's a lot of sci-fi romance out there, so you just have to know where to look.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fair. Did you find that you liked that kind of literature before you started writing, or is it something you kind of fell into?
No, I am a huge romance fan. I read romance. I love romance. I am delighted to be able to write romance and cross it over with sci-fi, which I also love. So yeah, I was a huge romance fan, and when I started writing, I was like, yes, I definitely want these books to have people that fall in love while also, kicking ass and saving the universe and whatever. But romance is going to be a core part of the story. So yeah.
I think you do a really good job of mixing it together, because they're always in really tense situations, and like naturally feelings come out of that. So
yeah, sometimes I put them in too many tense situations in a row, and my editor's like, so we're going to need some relationship building in here, which means like maybe they just need to take like a tiny break or something and like not be dying for a second so that they can actually get together. So she's always like, hey, maybe just a little more relationship building here.
It's nice to have somebody in your head saying, slow down, slow down.
Yeah.
That's always nice. So that kind of brings me into Hunt the Stars, is a lot of relationship building right at the beginning, because they're kind of headbutting all the time, and there's not a whole lot of action yet, aside from things that happen in like flashbacks or when they butt heads a little bit too much. Did you have to write that and then rewrite that to try and get that less tense moments all at once?
It actually started out pretty organically, because I was trying to get the crew to mesh, and I knew that they would not just, I mean, if you're at war with somebody 3 years ago and then all of a sudden they're on your ship, like it's going to lead to some tension that happens. And so it's almost, and while I was writing it, because I wrote Hunt the Stars in the beginning of the pandemic, when we were all still kind of in lockdown. So while I was writing it, I was trying to write all the things that, I missed, like having people over together and having dinner and just like enjoying life. And so that sort of, it is a little bit slower paced than some of my consortium books, because it is a lot of like, well, first of all, Faster Than Light Travel only works at, anchors and wormholes. And so you have a lot of time just in space to get anywhere. And so they just have a lot of time where they're together trying to figure out how to like not murder each other in their sleep. And so a lot of that was just trying to get the two crews to mesh together.
I think the scenes with them eating are especially my favorite, just because they're so awkward at first, and then it just, once they, a little later in the book, they're not eating together as much, and they're like, oh my god, I miss this so much.
Yeah. I love that. I'm glad you noticed.
You also made me want to cook paella. Thank you. Also, saffron is very expensive.
Yes.
Anybody out there, just maybe make it without the saffron.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it definitely is. It's like this tiny little grain cost $15, and you're like, okay, cool. Like,
Good.
yeah.
It smells really good, though. I mean,
Yeah.
oh, so one of the things that I love is Key, one of the other characters in the book, aside from Octavia. She is really into computers, and you don't just have her wave her hand and make everything just work instantly. Is this a product of you being a software engineer and knowing that that's not how it works?
Yes and no. I do let her wave her hands when it's convenient to me, because I do know that, like, cracking into different systems is not really that easy. But if I had her sit there and do it for like 3 months, that would be a really boring book. So there's definitely some hand waving that happens that does come from me being a software engineer, but I try to make it as realistically as possible within the time frame that I need it to happen. So it's kind of a little bit of both.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Do you think that your other career has influenced your writing at all in any other way?
I think it definitely has. A lot of people don't realize that software development is actually highly creative. Like, they think that it's very like logic based and left brain and follow steps and whatever, and it kind of is, but also you're solving problems. Like, you're solving problems and you're going about it in a way that you have to make leaps. And a lot of those leaps are creative leaps. Like, yes, they're logical leaps as well, but without the creative side, it's not as useful. And so doing that, and then also working up to deadline, like just figuring out time management, all of those sorts of things, definitely. And like, as you said, the tech side, like being able to write a realistic, computer engineer, like that's something that definitely helps when writing science fiction books. So
I imagine it also, my boyfriend Matt is a software engineer and he's very meticulous. Like, I'm going to write this down and I'm going to know where I made this mistake so that I can come back to it 16 steps later and see how I can fix it, massage it. So it seems like that's something that could be very useful for literature as well.
yeah, that definitely helps. It helps when I'm writing. It helps me keeping the various lists that keep me on track whenever I'm, trying to keep my world straight. And I'm writing book 3 right now, and I was like, didn't I mention this somewhere in book 1 or book 2? And I looked at my notes and I was like, yes, I did. I'm a genius. Like, so it definitely from that side, it helps as well.
Scrivener is great for keeping that stuff in order too. Like,
yeah,
if you're a writer and you don't use Scrivener yet, just look it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the pacing in your books is always really nice. And I really liked that we kind of already covered this, but you slowed down in the beginning of Hunt the Stars.
Well, I will say I am glad that you think that my pacing is nice, because that is something that I worry about constantly. So thank you so much for noticing and liking it, because that is something that I'm always worried about. Like, is this too slow? Is this too fast? Is there too much going on? Is there not enough going on? Like, it's a delicate line to walk sometimes.
I find that a lot of books kind of go too fast or not at all. So it's nice to have a slow, like a medium, where you have enough of these scenes where they're sitting and eating dinner and then somebody's getting punched in the face.
Yeah.
And then they have dinner again. So I think those pacing techniques really work well here. What's going to happen in the upcoming book, if you can say a little bit about it?
So book 2 is called Eclipse the Moon, which I almost forgot what it was called because that's where my brain is right now. It is coming out in July. There is a typo in the back of Hunt the Stars that says that it is July 2023. That is wrong. It is July 2022. So it is like 5 months from now instead of like 18 months from now. So everybody breathe a huge sigh of relief. And it follows Key and Varro. Those are the 2 main characters for that book. And it's a continuation of the investigation that they've sort of started in Hunt the Stars. I don't want to give too much away for people that haven't read the first book yet, because it is kind of a spoiler, but it continues with that, and Key and Varro end up kind of on their own for a little bit. So you'll have to read it to figure out why that is. But I had so much fun writing it because Tavi is very like steady and caring. She's like the rock that kind of holds the ship together. And Key is very much like the glittery chaos rainbow that sort of just like sparkles on everybody and explodes and then like disappears. And so writing her was such a different experience, but also so fun. So I hope people enjoy the second book as much as the first.
Did your editor have to rein you in from some of the sparkles?
My editor is amazing, and she's like more sparkles. So she is always on board with what I'm doing. So there have been very few cases where she's actually like tried to rein me in, because she's normally like, how about more of this? So she's amazing.
That's fantastic. It's always nice to have somebody in your corner like that.
Yeah.
How did you guys find each other? Did you submit a proposal for your original series?
I submitted actual Polaris for, I queried an agent, got the agent. We did the, an agent editing pass to sort of clean up Polaris. And then she sent it out to a bunch of editors, and Tessa at Harper Voyager was the one that I ended up going with. And it's been amazing. So I'm very happy.
You've actually made this your full-time career, right?
Yes, with the caveat that it is my full-time career because I am in a dual income household, and I was a software engineer for 8 years before becoming a full-time writer, because I would not necessarily recommend becoming a full-time writer without somebody with health insurance. That's really useful. So yes, I am writing full-time, but only because I'm having a lot of support.
Is there anything that you would suggest to people who are in a career but want to try writing?
The way that I actually started, well, I started writing multiple times. I started in college writing fan fiction, which I loved. So if you're just like sort of want to tip your toe into writing, fan fiction is a great place to start. Archive of Our Own is a big one. You'll often see it called AO3. So go read, write, get feedback. And then if you want to actually write original fiction, so I wrote fan fiction, then I sort of stopped writing because I started working and I just didn't have time. But then a friend invited me to do NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month in November, which is during the month of November, you try to write a 50,000 word novel. And 50,000 words isn't really a novel like my books, and generally are in the 110,000 range, and full-length novels generally range from basically 80 to 120, with sort of epic fantasy being 200 plus, but that's probably not what you want to, on your first foray into writing. But National Novel Writing Month in November, it's a whole community that gets together. So there's lots of support. You have fun. You just try and type out, I think it's something like 1,600 some odd words a day for the entire month. And you just focus. And so that's how I first started saying, hey, maybe I can do this writing thing, though the book that I wrote will never, ever, ever, ever see the light of day. But it did prove to me that I could get through an entire book. So
there's something about shitty first drafts, and that can be extended to shitty first books.
Yeah, that book, I mean, I learned a lot of what not to do. And so, but then I started writing Polaris, and there was another trunked novel in there as well was the novel I originally queried. It may see the light of day. It's an urban fantasy. It still needs some edits. But then I had talked to my agent, and I had mentioned that I was writing this sci-fi romance, and she's like, oh, send me 3 chapters. Because we weren't working together at that point. I was still querying her, and I was like, okay. and then I had like 1 chapter written. So over the course of a weekend, I'm like, I have to write 2 more chapters really fast. It must go right now because she needs it. And so then I sent her 3 chapters, and she was like, but between my original urban fantasy novel and 3 chapters of the new novel, that's what she actually offered rep on. And I was like, okay. And she's like, when do you think you could have this new novel done? And I think it was like October that we had that conversation. And I was like, oh, certainly I can have it done by the end of January, because in my, basically she had short-circuited my entire brain by agreeing to, represent me, and time lost all meaning. And so, the first book, it took me years to write. And the second book I ended up writing in something like 3.5 months. And then Polaris, which was the book in 3.5 months, was the book that I went on and sold to Harper Voyager. So it just works out that way sometimes. So however you get there, however you can make time for it, like just don't give up. Like if you really want to be a writer and do writing, even if you can only eke out 5 minutes a day, or an hour every other day. Like you don't have to write every day. I know that people say that you do, but don't believe everything you hear on the internet. Whatever time that you can commit to it, if it brings you joy, then do it.
That makes, like, I went to MFA, I got my MFA in writing, and yeah, that feels more real than most of the things they told us there.
Yeah.
Do you have any authors that you would particularly suggest if you, if other people wanted to read something similar to Hunt the Stars or Polaris Rising?
I do. There's a bunch on my website, because as soon as anybody asks me this question, I immediately blank on every book that I've ever read in my entire life. But some of my favorite authors are Alona Andrews and Nalini Singh and Kit Rosha. And those aren't necessarily set in space, but they each have sort of a sci-fi series. If you wanted set in space, I think Anna Gear has a series that's set on like a prison ship in space, which is really interesting. Martha Wells's Murderbot books, which I adore, are sort of set in space as well. So there's definitely a lot out there. I, of course, can't remember them because my brain goes, eek. But look on my website. There's plenty of book recs on my website.
It's kind of an unfair question too, because we're here to talk about your book, not other people's. So.
Oh no, I love talking. I adore talking about other people's books. I can't remember any of them for the life of me, but I adore having talking about my book. I'm like, yeah, it's okay. It's a book. Talking about other people's books, I'm like, read this right now. It's amazing.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Jessie.
Thanks for having me. I've had such a good time.
I can't wait to read more about the characters coming up in Eclipse the Moon, which is out July 12th, 2022. Right?
Yes. Yes. Okay. Yes. No, it is definitely 2022. I'm trying to spread that word far and wide, because I've had people be very devastated that it's going to be next year. And it's not next year. It's this year.
So if you want to check out more from Jessie Mihalik, go to jessiemihalik.com. Thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.
Thank you. You too.